The conference room felt smaller than usual that Tuesday morning. Seattle's gray sky pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Morrison and Associates, casting everything in a dull, lifeless light that seemed to match my mood perfectly. I sat in my usual spot at the far end of the mahogany table, fingers drumming nervously against my coffee mug as I watched my colleagues file in one by one. I'm Jordan, and I'd been working as a project coordinator at this mid-tier consulting firm for 3 years. 3 long years of being overlooked, undervalued, and consistently passed over for promotions. My direct supervisor, Kevin Walsh, had made it his personal mission to remind me daily that I was expendable. "All right, people, let's get this show on the road," Kevin barked as he strutted into the room, his expensive Italian suit doing nothing to mask his complete lack of charisma. The man had the personality of wet cardboard, yet somehow he'd climbed the corporate ladder faster than anyone I knew. The meeting was supposed to be routine, a quarterly review with our biggest client, Patricia Blackwood from Cascade Industries. Patricia was legendary in our industry, a self-made millionaire who'd built her logistics empire from nothing. Word around the office was that she didn't tolerate incompetence and had fired 3 consulting firms before landing with us. "Before Mrs. Blackwood arrives," Kevin continued, loosening his tie with theatrical authority, "I want to make something crystal clear. This quarter's numbers are disappointing. Some of you," his eyes landed squarely on me, "have been nothing short of dead weight." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I felt my cheeks burn as every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. My colleague Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while Tom cleared his throat and suddenly became very interested in his notebook. "Dead weight, Kevin? Really?" I found myself saying, my voice steadier than I expected. 3 years of swallowed pride and bitten tongues had finally reached their limit. "Yes, Jordan. Dead weight. You missed the Henderson deadline last month, your client retention scores are mediocre at best, and frankly, I'm not sure what value you bring to this team anymore." What Kevin conveniently forgot to mention was that the Henderson project had been sabotaged by his own poor planning. He'd changed the scope 3 times without adjusting the timeline, then blamed me when we couldn't meet the impossible deadline. As for client retention, I'd actually improved our scores by 15% over the past year, but Kevin had a way of rewriting history when it suited him. "That's not entirely accurate and you know it," I replied, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs. The Seattle rain had started, droplets racing down the windows like tears. "Don't you dare question my assessment in front of the team," Kevin's voice rose to what could only be described as a yell. "You are dead weight, Jordan. Pure and simple. If it weren't for company policy, you'd already be cleaning out your desk." The room fell silent except for the steady patter of rain against glass. I could smell the strong coffee growing cold in front of me, mixed with the faint scent of Kevin's aggressive cologne. My hands were shaking slightly, whether from anger or humiliation I couldn't tell. Lisa, bless her heart, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe we should focus on the client presentation instead of the presentation that Jordan was supposed to finalize but clearly dropped the ball on." "Again?" Kevin cut her off, his face flushed red with what seemed like genuine anger. "That was it. That was the moment I realized I couldn't take another second of this toxic environment. I'd given this company 3 years of my life, working late nights, weekends, sacrificing relationships and personal time, only to be publicly humiliated by a man who couldn't manage his way out of a paper bag. You know what, Kevin?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor. "I've had enough of your—" The conference room door opened with a soft click, and suddenly the energy in the room shifted completely. Patricia Blackwood walked in, and I understood immediately why she commanded such respect. She was probably in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun and sharp gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her navy blazer was impeccably tailored, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never had to ask twice for attention. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that somehow made her sound both gracious and intimidating. Kevin's demeanor changed so quickly it was almost comical. "Mrs. Blackwood." "Not at all, we were just wrapping up our team discussion. Please have a seat." As Patricia settled into the chair at the head of the table, I noticed her eyes scanning the room, taking in the obvious tension. She was sharp, there was no way she'd missed the awkward silence or the way everyone seemed to be avoiding eye contact. "Well then," she said, pulling out a leather portfolio, "shall we discuss the Cameron Logistics project?" Kevin immediately launched into what could only be described as a performance. He threw around buzzwords like synergy and optimization, while completely butchering the actual details of our proposal. I watched in horrified fascination as he misquoted our cost projections and completely missed the mark on Patricia's specific requirements. The timeline we're proposing is aggressive but achievable, Kevin was saying, gesturing wildly with his hands. We anticipate completion within 8 weeks, with full integration across all platforms. I knew for a fact that Patricia had specifically requested a 12-week timeline because of her company's internal restructuring. 8 weeks was not only unrealistic, it was impossible. I caught Lisa's eye across the table, and she looked as mortified as I felt. Patricia listened politely, taking occasional notes, but I could see the subtle tightening around her eyes that suggested she was less than impressed. When Kevin finally finished his rambling presentation, she set down her pen and looked around the table. "That's certainly interesting," she said diplomatically. "However, I have some concerns about the timeline. 8 weeks seems quite ambitious for a project of this scope." Kevin, completely missing her diplomatic tone, jumped in eagerly. "Mrs. Blackwood, I assure you, our team is fully capable of meeting any deadline. We pride ourselves on efficiency." "I'm sure you do," Patricia replied, her southern accent making even mild disagreements sound polite. "But I'm curious about the actual logistics. How do you plan to handle the warehouse integration in Denver while simultaneously managing the software rollout in 3 different time zones?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to drop. Kevin's confident smile faltered slightly as he realized he had no idea what she was talking about. The warehouse integration had been a key component of Patricia's original request, but Kevin had clearly not read the briefing materials thoroughly. "Well, that's a great question," Kevin stammered, loosening his tie. "Jordan, why don't you walk Mrs. Blackwood through our integration strategy?" It was a classic Kevin move, throw me under the bus when things got complicated. Normally, I would have fumbled through some generic response and let him maintain control of the presentation. But something about the morning's humiliation had changed something fundamental inside me. I looked at Patricia's expectant face, then at Kevin's increasingly desperate expression, and made a decision that would change everything. "Actually," I said, standing up and moving to the whiteboard, "I think there might be some confusion about the project scope." Kevin's eyes widened with what looked like panic, but I was already committed to this path. I began sketching out the actual warehouse locations, the software integration points, and the realistic timeline that Patricia had originally requested. The Denver facility presents unique challenges because of the elevation and climate control requirements for pharmaceutical storage, I explained, writing key points on the board. If we rush the integration, we risk contaminating temperature-sensitive inventory worth millions of dollars. Patricia leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "Go on." "The software rollout across time zones isn't just about scheduling," I continued, feeling more confident with each word. "It's about ensuring that each regional team has adequate training time and support during their peak operational hours. Rushing this process would almost guarantee system failures during your busiest seasons." "And your recommended timeline?" Patricia asked, her gray eyes fixed intently on me. 12 weeks with built-in buffer time for unexpected complications. It's not just about getting the job done, it's about getting it done right the first time. The room was so quiet I could hear the rain intensifying outside. Kevin looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. Lisa was trying not to smile, and Tom was taking notes furiously, probably realizing that someone was finally presenting accurate information. Patricia studied the whiteboard for a long moment, then turned her attention back to me. "You seem to understand the complexities of this project better than anyone else in the room. Have you worked with pharmaceutical logistics before?" "Not directly," I admitted, "but I've spent considerable time researching your industry requirements. Cascade Industries has a reputation for excellence, and I believe your project deserves the same level of attention to detail that you bring to your own operations." Something shifted in Patricia's expression, a subtle softening around her eyes that suggested I'd said something right. She glanced around the table, her gaze lingering on Kevin's increasingly pale face, before returning to me. "I appreciate your honesty and thoroughness," she said finally. "It's refreshing to speak with someone who's clearly done their homework." Kevin tried to regain control of the situation. "Of course, Mrs. Blackwood, our entire team has been working diligently on your project. Jordan is just one member of our comprehensive approach." Patricia's smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure everyone has contributed. However, I have a specific request." She opened her leather portfolio and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table directly to me. Not to Kevin, not to the center of the table for general distribution, but specifically to me. "I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss the project details more thoroughly." Jordan, would you be available to lead that discussion? The words seemed to echo in the suddenly silent conference room. Kevin's mouth actually fell open, his face cycling through various shades of red and white. Lisa looked like she was trying very hard not to cheer out loud. Yes, absolutely, I managed to say, picking up the business card with hands that were no longer shaking. Patricia stood gracefully, gathering her materials. Excellent. My assistant will call this afternoon to schedule something for later this week. I'm looking forward to working with someone who understands the importance of doing things correctly rather than quickly. As she moved toward the door, she paused and looked back at the room. Oh, and gentlemen? In my experience, the people who get called dead weight are often the ones carrying the heaviest load. With that, Patricia Blackwood walked out of the conference room, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like the aftermath of an earthquake. Kevin stared at the closed door for a full 10 seconds before turning to me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, anger, and what might have been the first glimmer of respect he'd ever shown me. Well, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, I guess we need to talk. But I was already packing up my notes, Patricia's business card tucked safely in my shirt pocket. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe freely in that conference room. The rain continued to fall against the windows, but somehow the Seattle skyline looked a little brighter than it had that morning. The rest of that Tuesday passed in a surreal haze. Word about the meeting spread through the office faster than a Seattle coffee shop line at 8 a.m. I could feel eyes following me as I walked through the cubicle maze, could hear whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I passed. Some looks were sympathetic, others curious, but most carried the unmistakable energy of office drama unfolding in real time. Kevin had retreated to his corner office immediately after Patricia left, and hadn't emerged for the rest of the day. Through his glass walls, I could see him pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear in what looked like increasingly frantic conversations. I had a pretty good idea who he was calling, probably every senior partner in the firm, trying to do damage control before word reached the wrong ears. Jordan. Lisa appeared at my cubicle around 4 p.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee from the good machine in the executive break room. Spill everything. And I mean everything. I accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. After this morning's humiliation and afternoon of anxious energy, caffeine felt like a necessity rather than a luxury. There's not much to spill, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Patricia Blackwood asked me to lead a follow-up meeting. That's it. That's it. Lisa lowered her voice and leaned closer. Jordan, do you have any idea what just happened in there? I've been at this company for 5 years and I've never seen Kevin look that rattled. Patricia Blackwood basically told him his project manager was incompetent and requested you instead. When she put it that way, the magnitude of the situation started to sink in. Cascade Industries represented about 30% of our firm's annual revenue. Patricia Blackwood wasn't just any client, she was the client. And she'd specifically asked for me to lead the project that Kevin had been counting on to secure his promotion to senior partner. I'm trying not to overthink it, I admitted, taking a sip of coffee. For all I know, she just wants to clarify some technical details before letting Kevin take back over. Lisa gave me a look that suggested I was being deliberately obtuse. Jordan, you've been here 3 years. When has Kevin ever let anyone else take back over a project once he's claimed ownership? She had a point. Kevin Walsh was many things, but generous with credit wasn't one of them. He'd built his reputation by taking ownership of successful projects and deflecting blame for failures onto his subordinates. The idea that he'd willingly step aside after Patricia had publicly requested my involvement was almost laughable. My desk phone rang, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed an external number I didn't recognize. Jordan speaking. Good afternoon, this is Catherine Mills, executive assistant to Patricia Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood asked me to schedule a follow-up meeting with you regarding the Cascade Industries project. My heart rate immediately kicked up a notch. Of course. When would be convenient for Mrs. Blackwood? Are you available Thursday at 10 a.m.? Mrs. Blackwood prefers to meet at our Seattle office rather than your conference room. I'll email you the address and parking information. Thursday at 10 works perfectly. Should I prepare anything specific for the meeting? Mrs. Blackwood mentioned she'd like to see your detailed timeline analysis and risk assessment for the warehouse integration project. She was particularly impressed with your understanding of the pharmaceutical logistics requirements. After hanging up, I sat staring at my computer screen for a long moment. Patricia wanted detailed analysis and risk assessment, the kind of comprehensive work that typically took weeks to prepare properly. I had exactly 36 hours. Lisa was still hovering nearby, clearly dying to know what the call was about. Thursday at 10, I told her. At Cascade's office. Their office. Lisa's eyebrows shot up. Jordan, that's huge. Patricia Blackwood doesn't invite random project coordinators to her headquarters for casual chats. The rest of the afternoon flew by as I dove into research mode. I pulled up every file we had on Cascade Industries, cross-referenced their warehouse locations with pharmaceutical storage regulations, and began building the kind of detailed project analysis that Kevin should have prepared weeks ago. By 7 p.m., the office had emptied out except for the cleaning crew and me. The Seattle skyline was twinkling through the rain-streaked windows as I worked through logistics scenarios and potential risk factors. My back ached from hunching over my laptop, and my eyes were starting to blur from staring at spreadsheets, but I was more energized than I'd felt in months. Working late again, I see. I looked up to find Kevin standing behind my cubicle, his tie loosened and his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. His tone was carefully neutral, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. Just catching up on some research, I replied, minimizing my screen instinctively. Kevin moved closer, close enough that I could smell the stress sweat beneath his expensive cologne. Look, Jordan, about this morning. Things got a little heated and maybe I came down harder than necessary. It wasn't exactly an apology, but from Kevin Walsh, it was probably as close as I was going to get. Maybe we should focus on moving forward, I said diplomatically. Right. Moving forward. Kevin pulled up Lisa's empty chair and sat down, a gesture that immediately put me on high alert. Kevin never sat at subordinates' desks. This meeting with Patricia Blackwood, I think it would be best if I accompanied you. Present a unified front, you know? There it was. I'd been wondering when Kevin would try to insert himself back into the picture. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but Mrs. Blackwood specifically requested individual consultation. I think it's better if I honor that request. Kevin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Jordan, let's be realistic here. You're a project coordinator with 3 years of experience. Patricia Blackwood is one of the most powerful business leaders on the West Coast. Don't you think she might appreciate having someone with more senior experience available to answer complex questions? The condescension in his voice was familiar, but for some reason, it didn't have the same impact it usually did. Maybe it was because I'd spent the afternoon learning more about logistics and pharmaceutical regulations than Kevin had apparently bothered to learn in months of supposedly managing this project. I think Patricia Blackwood is smart enough to know what kind of expertise she needs, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Kevin's expression shifted, revealing a flash of something that looked almost like desperation. Look, Jordan, I'm trying to help you here. This project is worth millions of dollars to our firm. If something goes wrong, if you make a mistake or overlook something important, it's not just going to reflect poorly on you. It's going to reflect on our entire team. And if something goes right? I asked. If the meeting goes well and Patricia is satisfied with the analysis? Kevin's pause was just long enough to be telling. Then obviously the whole team deserves credit for the preparation and collaboration that made it possible. Of course. Kevin would swoop in to claim credit for any success while making sure I bore full responsibility for any potential failure. It was his standard operating procedure, and I'd fallen for it dozens of times over the past 3 years. I understand your concerns, I said finally, but I think I can handle this meeting. Kevin studied my face for a long moment, probably trying to figure out why his usual intimidation tactics weren't working. Finally, he stood up and straightened his tie. Well, if you're determined to go it alone, I suppose that's your choice. Just remember, Jordan, this isn't a game. Patricia Blackwood doesn't give second chances, and neither does this firm. With that thinly veiled threat, Kevin walked away, his footsteps echoing through the empty office. I watched him disappear into the elevator before turning back to my computer screen. The research I'd been working on was still there, columns of data and analysis that represented hours of careful work. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't doing this work so that Kevin could take credit for it. I was doing it because Patricia Blackwood had specifically asked for MY expertise. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. I worked until nearly 10 p.m., building comprehensive timelines and risk matrices, researching pharmaceutical storage regulations and logistics best practices. By the time I finally packed up my laptop, I had the foundation for what I hoped would be the most thorough project analysis Patricia had ever seen. The drive home through Seattle's rain-slicked streets gave me time to think about what was really happening. This wasn't just about one meeting or one project. This was about whether I was going to continue being the person who let Kevin Walsh walk all over me, or whether I was going to finally stand up and claim the respect I'd earned through 3 years of hard work and dedication. My apartment felt different that night, smaller somehow, but also more like a launching pad than a hiding place. I spread my research materials across the dining table, double-checking facts and figures until my eyes could barely focus on the numbers. As I finally crawled into bed around midnight, one thought kept circling through my mind. In less than 40 hours I would be sitting across from Patricia Blackwood, representing not just myself but potentially my entire future career. The rain continued pattering against my bedroom window, but for the first time in years, it sounded less like Seattle's eternal sadness and more like the rhythm of possibility. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that matched my nervous energy perfectly. I'd been awake since 5 a.m., going over my presentation notes one final time while nursing what was probably my fourth cup of coffee. My dining table looked like a logistics command center, covered with printed charts, timeline analyses and risk assessment matrices. The Cascade Industries building was located in the heart of Seattle's business district, a gleaming 30-story tower that commanded attention among the city's impressive skyline. As I stood in the lobby at 9:45 a.m., clutching my carefully organized portfolio, I couldn't help but feel intimidated by the sheer scale of Patricia Blackwood's operation. The lobby itself was a study in understated elegance, polished granite floors, warm wood paneling, and large windows that somehow made the Seattle rain look artistic rather than depressing. Employees moved through the space with the confident efficiency that comes from working for a successful company, their conversations creating a low hum of productivity. "Jordan?" A woman's voice interrupted my observations. "I'm Catherine Mills, Mrs. Blackwood's assistant. Thank you for coming in today." Catherine was probably in her 30s, with short auburn hair and the kind of professional polish that suggested she was far more than just an assistant. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how valuable she was to Patricia's operation. "Mrs. Blackwood is just finishing up a call with our Denver facility," Catherine continued as she led me toward a bank of elevators. "She'll be ready for you in just a few minutes. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." The elevator ride to the 28th floor was smooth and quiet, giving me time to review my mental notes one more time. I'd structured my presentation around 3 key areas: timeline optimization, risk mitigation, and cost efficiency. Each section was backed up by detailed research and real-world examples that I'd spent the past 2 days compiling. Patricia's office was everything I'd expected and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline and Elliott Bay, while the interior design struck the perfect balance between professional authority and personal warmth. The walls featured a mix of business awards, photographs from various company milestones, and what appeared to be original artwork by local artists. "Jordan." "Right on time," Patricia said, emerging from behind a desk that was impressively organized despite being covered with multiple projects and reports. Today she was wearing a charcoal gray suit that somehow made her silver hair look even more striking. "I hope Catherine took good care of you downstairs." "She did, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to meet with me today." "My pleasure. Please have a seat." Patricia gestured toward a comfortable seating area near the windows. "I have to admit, I'm curious to see what you've prepared. Your insights during Tuesday's meeting were exactly the kind of practical thinking I've been hoping to see from your firm." As we settled into the leather chairs, Catherine appeared with coffee service on a silver tray, along with what looked like artisanal pastries from one of Seattle's upscale bakeries. "I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of the warehouse integration project." I began, opening my portfolio and pulling out the bound presentation I'd assembled. "I wanted to address the timeline concerns we discussed, as well as some potential risk factors that I think deserve attention." Patricia accepted the presentation and began flipping through it immediately. I watched her eyes scan the pages, occasionally pausing to study a particular chart or timeline. Her expression was unreadable, the kind of neutral professionalism that successful executives master early in their careers. "This is quite thorough," she said after several minutes. "Walk me through your timeline assumptions." For the next hour, I presented the most comprehensive project analysis I'd ever created. I explained why the Denver warehouse required specialized handling procedures, detailed the software integration challenges across multiple time zones, and outlined contingency plans for various potential complications. Patricia asked pointed questions throughout, testing my understanding of pharmaceutical regulations, logistics coordination, and cost-benefit analysis. Each question revealed just how deeply she understood her own business, and I found myself grateful for the extensive research I'd conducted. The pharmaceutical storage regulations are particularly complex, I explained, pointing to a detailed chart I'd created. Temperature fluctuations of even a few degrees can compromise millions of dollars worth of inventory. That's why I'm recommending a phased integration approach, with full environmental testing at each stage. And the additional cost of this phased approach? Initially higher, but the risk mitigation more than justifies the expense. A single contamination event could cost Cascade Industries far more than the entire integration project. Patricia nodded thoughtfully, making notes in the margins of my presentation. You've clearly done your homework. This level of analysis is exactly what I was hoping to see from Morrison and Associates. I have to ask, she continued, setting down her pen and looking directly at me, how long have you been working on logistics projects? Honestly, this is my first major logistics project. But I've spent the past 3 years working on various operational optimization initiatives, and I believe the analytical principles are similar regardless of the industry. I waited for her reaction, wondering if my honesty about limited direct experience would kill whatever credibility I'd built up. Instead, Patricia smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from her. I appreciate your honesty. In my experience, fresh perspective combined with thorough preparation often produces better results than years of experience doing things the same way. She stood up and walked to the windows, gazing out at the Seattle skyline while continuing our conversation. Jordan, I'm going to be direct with you. I've been working with consulting firms for over 15 years, and I've seen every type of project manager imaginable. Some are brilliant strategists with no practical experience. Others are detail-oriented but can't see the big picture. Most fall somewhere in between, competent but unremarkable. Patricia turned back to face me, her gray eyes intense with focus. What I saw in Tuesday's meeting and what I'm seeing in your presentation today is something different. You understand that successful projects aren't just about meeting deadlines or staying within budget. They're about understanding the real-world implications of every decision. Thank you, I managed to say, feeling both proud and slightly overwhelmed by her assessment. Which brings me to my next point, Patricia continued, returning to her chair. I have a proposition for you, and I want you to think carefully before responding. My heart rate immediately kicked up a notch. In my experience, propositions from powerful executives could go either way: amazing opportunities or career-ending disasters. Cascade Industries is planning a major expansion over the next 2 years, Patricia began. We're looking at new warehouse facilities in Denver, Phoenix, and Atlanta, with integrated software systems connecting all of our operations from Seattle to Miami. It's a complex, multi-million-dollar initiative that will essentially reshape how our company operates. She paused, presumably to let the magnitude of what she was describing sink in. I need someone to oversee the project management aspects of this expansion. Someone who understands both the technical requirements and the practical realities of logistics operations. Someone who won't just tell me what they think I want to hear. The implications of what she was suggesting hit me like a physical force. Patricia Blackwood was talking about a project that would dwarf anything I'd ever worked on, a career-defining opportunity that could change everything about my professional trajectory. Are you offering me a position with Cascade Industries? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm offering you the chance to lead this project as an external consultant. You would work directly with my team, with full authority to make operational decisions and manage timelines. The contract would be for 18 months initially, with the possibility of extension based on results. Patricia pulled out a folder from her desk and handed it to me. The compensation details are in here, along with the project scope and expectations. I think you'll find the terms quite competitive. I opened the folder and nearly choked on my coffee. The proposed consulting fee was more than double my current annual salary at Morrison and Associates, not including performance bonuses and benefits. This is incredibly generous, I said, trying to process the numbers I was seeing. It's market rate for the level of responsibility I'm offering you, Patricia replied matter-of-factly. The question is whether you're ready for that level of responsibility. The weight of the decision settled over me like a heavy blanket. This was everything I'd been working toward for 3 years: recognition, respect, financial security, and the chance to work on projects that would actually make a difference. But it was also terrifying. Leaving Morrison and Associates would mean abandoning whatever security I'd built up, burning bridges with Kevin and potentially other colleagues, and taking on challenges that were far beyond anything in my current experience. I need to ask, I said carefully, what happens with the current warehouse integration project? The one we discussed on Tuesday. Patricia's expression shifted slightly, revealing what might have been amusement. That project would be the first phase of your larger consulting engagement. Consider it a trial run for the more extensive work ahead. And Morrison and Associates would continue to be involved in certain aspects of the project, but you would be the primary point of contact and decision maker for all logistics-related elements. I could only imagine how Kevin would react to that arrangement. Actually, I could imagine it quite clearly, and the mental image wasn't pleasant. I don't need an answer today, Patricia continued. This is a significant career decision, and you should take time to consider all the implications. But I will need to know by Monday morning. The expansion timeline is aggressive, and I need to have my team in place soon. She stood up, signaling that our meeting was coming to an end. Jordan, I want you to know that I don't make offers like this lightly. I've seen something in your approach to problem solving that gives me confidence you can handle this level of challenge. As Catherine escorted me back to the elevators, my mind was spinning with possibilities and complications. The folder Patricia had given me felt like it weighed 100 pounds, containing as it did the potential to completely change my life. The elevator ride down to the lobby passed in a blur, and before I knew it, I was standing back on the Seattle sidewalk, rain misting around me as the city's usual afternoon weather settled in. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine, staring up at the Cascade Industries building and trying to process what had just happened. Patricia Blackwood had offered me the kind of opportunity that most consultants only dream about, the chance to lead a major project for an industry leader, with compensation and responsibility far beyond my current level. But accepting would mean leaving behind everything familiar, taking risks that could either launch my career or destroy it completely. As I finally started the drive back to Morrison and Associates, one thought kept echoing through my mind. By Monday morning, I would need to decide whether I was ready to bet everything on myself. The Seattle rain continued to fall, but somehow it no longer felt like an obstacle. It felt like the soundtrack to a decision that would define the rest of my professional life. The weekend passed in a haze of anxious energy and sleepless nights. I must have read through Patricia's contract offer a dozen times, each review revealing new details that made the opportunity seem both more attractive and more terrifying. The scope of work was enormous, overseeing warehouse construction, software integration, and logistics optimization across multiple states. The kind of project that could either make my career or end it spectacularly. By Sunday evening, I'd filled 3 legal pads with pros and cons lists, called my college mentor Dr. Rebecca Martinez twice for advice, and even considered reaching out to my parents in Portland, though I ultimately decided against involving them in a decision this complex. Dr. Martinez had been characteristically direct during our phone conversation. Jordan, in 20 years of academic and consulting work, I've learned that the biggest career regrets usually come from opportunities not taken, not from calculated risks that didn't work out. The question isn't whether you're qualified, it's whether you're ready to grow into the qualifications. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's typical gray drizzle, but I felt more clear-headed than I had all weekend. I'd made my decision sometime around 3 a.m., lying awake in bed and finally admitting to myself what I'd known since Thursday afternoon. I couldn't pass up this opportunity. But first, I had to survive what promised to be a very uncomfortable conversation with Kevin Walsh. I arrived at Morrison and Associates early, hoping to catch Kevin before the office filled up with potential witnesses to what could be an explosive discussion. His corner office light was already on, and I could see him through the glass walls, hunched over his computer with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a crisis. I knocked on his door frame, and Kevin looked up with an expression that immediately told me he knew why I was there. "Jordan. Come in, close the door behind you." Kevin's office was exactly what you'd expect from someone desperately trying to project senior partner material, expensive furniture, carefully arranged awards and certificates, and a view of the city that he'd probably fought hard to secure. But this morning it felt more like a stage set than an actual workspace. "I assume you're here about the Blackwood meeting," Kevin said without preamble. "Word travels fast in this business." I sat down across from his desk, suddenly curious about how much he actually knew. "What have you heard?" "Enough." Kevin leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "Patricia Blackwood's assistant called our senior partners on Friday afternoon. Apparently, she was very impressed with your presentation and wants to discuss expanded consulting arrangements." So he knew. That actually made things easier, no need to dance around the subject or pretend this was a routine check-in. "Patricia offered me a consulting position to lead her expansion project," I said directly. "I'm here to give you my 2 weeks' notice." Kevin's expression didn't change, but I caught a slight tightening around his eyes. "I see. And you've already accepted her offer?" I'm calling her this morning to accept, yes. For a long moment, Kevin just stared at me, probably trying to figure out his next move. I'd expected anger, maybe even shouting, but his response was more calculated than emotional. Jordan, I think you're making a mistake. Patricia Blackwood is known for being demanding, perfectionist, and frankly ruthless when projects don't meet her expectations. You'll be in over your head within a month. Maybe, I acknowledged. But I'd rather fail attempting something challenging than succeed at something that doesn't matter. Kevin's jaw tightened at what was obviously a reference to my 3 years of being underutilized and undervalued at Morrison & Associates. Look, he continued, switching to a more conciliatory tone, I'll admit that things have been tense between us lately. Maybe I've been too focused on results and not enough on team development. But we can work on that. I'm prepared to offer you a promotion to senior project coordinator, with a substantial raise. It was exactly the kind of offer I would have jumped at 6 months ago. But after Thursday's meeting with Patricia, the idea of accepting a token promotion from Kevin felt like stepping backward rather than forward. I appreciate the offer, but I've already made my decision. Kevin stood up and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back in what I recognized as his thinking pose. When he turned back to face me, his expression had shifted to something that looked almost like desperation. Jordan, you need to understand the politics here. Patricia Blackwood specifically requesting you over me, that's not going to sit well with the senior partners. They're going to see it as a failure of leadership on my part, which means they're going to be looking for someone to blame when things go wrong. And you think that someone will be me? I think that if this consulting arrangement doesn't work out perfectly, Patricia will move on to the next firm and you'll be left with a reputation for overreach and failure. Meanwhile, Morrison & Associates will remember that you abandoned a stable position for a risky gamble. There was probably some truth to Kevin's warning. The consulting world was smaller than it appeared, and reputations could be made or destroyed quickly. But I'd spent 3 years watching Kevin take credit for my work while deflecting blame for his failures, and I was tired of making decisions based on fear. I understand the risks, I said finally. But I also understand the cost of staying somewhere that doesn't value what I bring to the table. Kevin returned to his desk and sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 40-something years. Fine. If you're determined to do this, I won't stand in your way. But I want you to know that there won't be a position here for you if things don't work out with Cascade Industries. I wouldn't expect there to be. The rest of our conversation covered the practical details of transitioning my current projects to other team members. Kevin was professional but distant, clearly processing the implications of losing his primary scapegoat and having to explain to senior partners why his biggest client had specifically requested someone else to lead their expansion project. By 10 a.m., I was back at my cubicle, staring at Patricia Blackwood's business card and trying to work up the courage to make the phone call that would change everything. Around me, the office buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy, but I felt disconnected from it all, as if I was already somewhere else. Jordan? Lisa appeared at my cubicle, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that suggested she'd heard at least some version of recent events. We need to talk. We found an empty conference room, and I filled her in on the details of Patricia's offer and my conversation with Kevin. Lisa listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of surprise. So you're really doing it, she said when I finished. You're actually leaving Morrison & Associates to work directly for Patricia Blackwood. Assuming I can work up the nerve to make the phone call, yes. Lisa studied my face for a moment, then broke into the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all morning. Jordan, in the 5 years I've known you, I've watched you do excellent work while Kevin took credit for it, solve complex problems while he claimed the victories, and maintain your professionalism while he treated you like an intern. If anyone deserves this opportunity, it's you. But what if Kevin's right? What if I'm in over my head and this whole thing crashes and burns? Then you'll crash and burn doing something that actually matters, working for someone who recognizes your abilities. That's better than slowly suffocating in a job that undervalues everything you have to offer. Lisa's confidence in me was both encouraging and terrifying. She'd watched me navigate Kevin's toxic management style for years, had seen me produce quality work under impossible conditions, and somehow still believed I was ready for this level of responsibility. Besides, she continued, Patricia Blackwood didn't build a multi-million-dollar company by making bad decisions about people. If she thinks you can handle this project, maybe you should trust her judgment. At 10:30 a.m., I finally dialed Patricia's direct number. Catherine Mills answered on the second ring. Good morning, Jordan. Mrs. Blackwood is expecting your call. Let me put you through. Jordan. Patricia's voice was warm and energetic. I hope you've had time to consider our discussion. I have, and I'd like to accept your offer. I'm very excited about the opportunity to lead this expansion project. Excellent. I was hoping you'd see the potential in what we're building here. Catherine will send over the formal contract documents this afternoon, along with information about our project kickoff meeting next Monday. About Morrison and Associates, I said, feeling obligated to address the elephant in the room. I've given my notice, but I want to make sure the transition doesn't create any complications for the current warehouse project. Patricia's laugh was genuine and slightly mischievous. Jordan, I've been working with consulting firms long enough to know how these transitions work. Morrison and Associates will adapt, and frankly, they'll probably benefit from being forced to step up their game. After hanging up, I sat in the conference room for several minutes, trying to process what I'd just committed to. In less than 2 weeks, I would be leading a multi-million-dollar expansion project for one of the most successful logistics companies on the West Coast. The thought was both exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. The rest of the day passed quickly as I began the process of transitioning my current projects and preparing handoff documentation for my replacement. Several colleagues stopped by my cubicle to offer congratulations and express amazement that I'd landed such a significant opportunity. Tom from accounting was particularly direct. Jordan, I've got to ask, how did you go from Kevin yelling at you on Tuesday to Patricia Blackwood offering you a consulting contract by Thursday? Honestly, I stopped trying to avoid conflict and started speaking up for what I knew was right. Turns out that's exactly what Patricia was looking for. By 6 p.m., most of the office had cleared out, but I remained at my desk, organizing files and making notes for whoever would inherit my projects. The work felt both familiar and strange. I'd done similar transition preparations before, but never with the knowledge that I was moving towards something genuinely exciting rather than just escaping something unpleasant. Jordan. Kevin's voice interrupted my organizing. He was standing at the entrance to my cubicle, holding a manila folder and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. I wanted to give you this, he said, extending the folder. It's a letter of recommendation. Professional courtesy. I opened the folder and scanned the letter. It was surprisingly generous, highlighting my analytical skills, project management abilities, and dedication to client satisfaction. No mention of our conflicts or the circumstances of my departure. Thank you, I said, genuinely surprised by the gesture. I wasn't expecting this. Kevin shrugged, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Whatever personal issues we've had, you're good at what you do. I'd rather see you succeed somewhere else than fail because I was petty about a letter of recommendation. It was probably the closest thing to an apology I was going to get from Kevin Walsh, and maybe the most honest moment we'd shared in 3 years of working together. I appreciate that. Really? Kevin nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Jordan? For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. This place was never going to give you the opportunities you deserve. With that surprisingly candid admission, Kevin walked away, leaving me alone with my transition work and a growing sense of anticipation about what came next. By the time I finally left the office that evening, Seattle's afternoon drizzle had given way to actual sunlight breaking through the clouds, a rare enough occurrence to feel symbolic. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Martinez to share the news. Jordan. I was hoping you'd call. How did it go with your boss? Better than expected, actually. Kevin was professional about it, even gave me a letter of recommendation. And how are you feeling about the decision? I paused at my car, looking back at the Morrison and Associates building where I'd spent 3 years learning to advocate for myself, often the hard way. Terrified, I admitted, but also more excited about work than I've been since I started here. Patricia Blackwood is giving me the chance to prove what I'm actually capable of, not just what Kevin thinks I'm capable of. That's all anyone can ask for, the opportunity to show what they can do when someone believes in them. As I drove home through Seattle's early evening traffic, I found myself thinking about Tuesday morning's humiliation in the conference room. Kevin calling me dead weight had felt like the end of something at the time, the final confirmation that I'd never be valued at Morrison and Associates. Instead, it had turned out to be the beginning of everything I'd been working toward. Sometimes the worst moments in our careers aren't endings at all. Sometimes they're just the push we needed to finally take the risks that lead to the opportunities we deserve. The Seattle skyline looked different from my car window that evening, less like a barrier to somewhere else and more like the foundation for whatever came next. In 1 week, I would start a new chapter of my career, working for someone who saw potential where my previous boss had seen problems. It had taken 3 years, 1 humiliating meeting, and the courage to finally speak up for myself, but I was finally ready to find out what I was really capable of accomplishing. The rain had stopped completely by the time I reached my apartment, and for the first time in months, Seattle felt less like a city I was stuck in and more like a city where anything was possible. 6 months later. The Denver warehouse facility stretched out before us like a testament to careful planning and flawless execution. Patricia Blackwood stood next to me on the observation deck, watching as the final pieces of our integrated logistics system came online 6 weeks ahead of schedule and 12% under budget. The pharmaceutical storage protocols are working perfectly, I reported, checking the environmental readings on my tablet. Temperature consistency is within 0.2 degrees, humidity is stable, and the automated inventory tracking system is processing orders faster than our most optimistic projections. Patricia nodded with satisfaction, her silver hair catching the Colorado afternoon sunlight streaming through the facility's skylights. And Phoenix? Construction is ahead of schedule. We should have the facility operational by March, with Atlanta coming online by June. The integrated software system has exceeded all performance benchmarks. 6 months ago, standing in that Seattle conference room while Kevin Walsh called me dead weight, I never could have imagined I'd be here. Leading a multi-million-dollar expansion project, managing teams across 4 time zones, and earning the respect of one of the most demanding executives in the logistics industry. The work had been challenging, more challenging than anything I'd ever attempted. There had been moments of doubt, late nights spent troubleshooting unexpected complications, and decisions that kept me awake wondering if I'd chosen correctly. But Patricia had been right about my abilities, even when I wasn't sure about them myself. "Jordan," Patricia said, turning from the warehouse floor to look at me directly, "I have something to discuss with you." My heart rate kicked up slightly. In 6 months of working together, I'd learned that Patricia's serious tone usually preceded either very good news or very challenging requests. "Cascade Industries is acquiring a logistics company in Portland," she continued. "It's a smaller operation, but they have some innovative supply chain technologies that could revolutionize our entire West Coast network. I need someone to oversee the integration and optimize their operations for scalability." She paused, the same way she had 6 months ago when offering me this position. "I'm offering you a permanent executive position with Cascade Industries. Vice President of Strategic Operations with equity participation and a seat on the senior management team. You'd be based in Seattle but travel extensively, and you'd have authority over a budget that's probably larger than your previous firm's annual revenue." The magnitude of what she was offering hit me like it had the first-time career-defining opportunity combined with responsibility that would stretch every skill I possessed. But this time I didn't need to think about it. "I accept," I said immediately. "When do I start?" Patricia's smile was brilliant. "I was hoping you'd say that. Welcome to the executive team, Jordan." As we shook hands, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the warehouse's polished surfaces, confident, capable, and finally working at the level I'd always known I was capable of reaching. Sometimes the biggest career transformations start with the smallest moments of courage. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to speak up when everyone else expects them to stay silent. And sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is having someone call you dead weight in front of the exact person who's been waiting to find someone with your particular strengths. 6 months later, Kevin Walsh was still at Morrison & Associates, still looking for someone else to blame for his management failures. I heard through Lisa that he'd been passed over for senior partner again, with the firm citing concerns about his leadership style and client retention. As for me, I was standing in a state-of-the-art logistics facility that existed because someone had finally given me the opportunity to show what I could accomplish when I stopped accepting other people's limitations as my own. The view from the top was even better than I'd imagined. But that morning in Denver was still weeks away. Back in my Seattle apartment on that Monday evening, after accepting Patricia's offer and surviving my conversation with Kevin, I was just beginning to understand what I'd committed myself to. The next 2 weeks at Morrison & Associates passed in a blur of transition meetings, project handoffs, and awkward conversations with colleagues who were still processing my sudden career pivot. Some were genuinely excited for me, others seemed skeptical that I could handle such a significant opportunity, and a few appeared almost resentful that I'd managed to escape what they saw as their shared corporate prison. Kevin maintained his professional distance, but I caught him watching me sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite decode. Maybe it was regret about how he'd handled our working relationship, or maybe it was just frustration that his preferred scapegoat was abandoning ship before he could find a suitable replacement. Lisa organized a small farewell gathering at a downtown Seattle bar on my last Friday afternoon. Nothing elaborate, just 5 or 6 colleagues sharing drinks and pretending that corporate transitions weren't inherently awkward social situations. "So what's the first thing you're going to do when you start working for Patricia Blackwood?" Tom asked, nursing his second beer and looking genuinely curious. "Probably panic," I admitted, which got a laugh from everyone. "But after that, I'm going to focus on proving that her confidence in me wasn't misplaced." "You know," Lisa said, leaning closer so she could lower her voice, "I heard Kevin had to explain to the senior partners why Cascade Industries specifically requested someone else to manage their expansion project. Apparently it didn't go well for him." I felt a brief flash of sympathy for Kevin, quickly followed by the reminder that he'd created his own problems through 3 years of poor management and taking credit for other people's work. "That's not really my concern anymore," I said, and meant it. "I'm more interested in focusing on what comes next." My final day at Morrison & Associates was surprisingly anticlimactic. I cleaned out my cubicle, returned my company laptop and security badge, and walked out of the building at 5 p.m. without ceremony or fanfare. 3 years of my professional life reduced to a cardboard box of personal items and a letter of recommendation from a boss who'd never appreciated what I brought to the table. But as I loaded the box into my car and looked back at the building where I'd learned so much about advocating for myself, I felt more excitement than sadness. Tomorrow would be my first day working directly for Patricia Blackwood, beginning a project that would either validate everything I believed about my abilities or teach me some very expensive lessons about overconfidence. That weekend, I spent Saturday preparing for my new role, researching Cascade Industries' history, studying logistics industry trends, and reviewing the detailed project timeline Patricia had provided. Sunday I forced myself to relax, walking through Pike Place Market and trying to enjoy what felt like the calm before a very intense storm. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's characteristic drizzle, but I felt more energized than I had in months. My first meeting with Patricia's internal team was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the Cascade Industries headquarters, where I would officially begin the most challenging and potentially rewarding work of my career. As I drove through Seattle's morning traffic, I thought about the series of events that had led me here. Kevin's public humiliation in the conference room had been devastating in the moment, but it had also forced me to finally stand up for myself and demonstrate the expertise I'd been quietly developing for years. Sometimes our careers change direction not because we plan them to, but because circumstances force us to show sides of ourselves we didn't know we possessed. Sometimes the worst professional moments become the catalyst for the best opportunities we never saw coming. The Cascade Industries building looked even more impressive in the gray morning light, its glass surfaces reflecting Seattle's skyline like a promise of bigger things ahead. As I walked through the lobby toward the elevators, I felt the same nervous energy I'd experienced 2 weeks ago, but with an important difference. This time, I wasn't hoping to survive the meeting. I was ready to excel in it. The elevator carried me toward the 28th floor and the beginning of whatever came next, while Seattle spread out below me like a city full of possibilities I was finally ready to explore. Patricia Blackwood had seen something in me that Kevin Walsh had missed, and I was about to find out whether her faith in my abilities was justified. But regardless of what challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain: I would never again accept being called dead weight by someone who had never taken the time to understand the weight I was actually capable of carrying. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped into my new professional life with confidence, preparation, and the hard-earned knowledge that sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is having someone underestimate you in front of exactly the right person. Outside, the Seattle rain continued to fall, but for the first time in years, it sounded less like an obstacle and more like applause.